everybody's process is different. And I know when I learned a lot about process and would listen to other people, you take it really seriously. What people who have succeeded, have done. It's like, oh, I've got to do it that way. And I do my stuff very specific to me, and it'll work for anybody if you just do it. But at the same time, it's like I hope it's like it feels like it's open enough. Like this is just what I do, but you don't have to do this.
Sure.
This is just yeah.
Oh no, it's not coming across as like sort of dogmatic. Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah, okay.
No, you're not stopping people at airports. Yeah, you're fine. Right. No, but I think it's good too because people can take a little bit from here and a little bit from there. Yeah. But no, it's not coming off as this is the ultimate way.
They're very different. It's one of the few mediums that you actually get a possessory credit. You've seen Neil Simon's Plaza Suite. I mean, occasionally you see Lee Daniels' movie and so forth. But by and large, the words are really so much more the focus, and the writer is really respected. So much more in theater. But it's a different kind of medium altogether. You get to write in theater. You get to write stories that are, can be very personal and very intimate and very small and really character driven and really, where the words are just important and it's all about dialogue and all of that. I had a funny experience when I taught screenwriting for many years for a group called Writers Boot Camp. And I had a student who was a great woman. She was an actress. But she was always kind of bucking me about, structure and like, why do I have to structure things this way? And can't you loosen up in terms of this and that? And I would just try to explain to her how structure and storytelling, worked a certain way. So she came to see the play. This was my very first play. It was a long time ago. And she walked out and she said to me, she hugged me and she says, I loved the play, but I loved the words. She says, I love that who's teaching me structure, that you wrote these amazing words that were just words. It was all words and character. And as an actress, that's, that was her priority, great words and great character. And it was really like very eye-opening to me that like, how different words are when it comes to theater. Because, movies are about showing, not telling, very, very often, because you have the ability to show a lot of things without having to explain a lot of things. Whereas in theater, it's just much more limited in terms of what you can show, so you end up telling more. And that can be very interesting, and writers enjoy telling stories, which you can do on stage. So I like that. The live part of it, I write a lot of comedies, and to be with an audience and to be in an audience, a live audience where they're laughing and really responding or crying or whatever, and to be around them live, even different than being in a theater watching people watch your movie. It's different. There's something about the live experience that's really very it's just very moving and very compelling. So that part is great. And I don't know, I think as a writer, I always encourage screenwriters to write plays as well. I did it as a kind of way to, I wrote my first play at a time where I just had a little time and I needed to get something done that was mine, that like I didn't have to worry about selling, I didn't have to worry about it, fitting any particular paradigms. I could tell the story that I wanted to tell. And it just happened to have worked out. The play was, I was very proud of the play. We actually did a stage reading of it, and I was just surprised at the response to it. And then, I was just encouraged to, get the play produced, and we did. And it was a really fantastic experience. You also, as the writer, get to deal very directly with the actors and the director in a very different way than you do in TV and film. And because it's really more of that team effort at that particular moment, particularly if it's a new play, that you're kind of still discovering the words and working on the words as you're in rehearsals. And I'm also very, I've always been, whether it's in a film I've written or a play, I'm very interested in hearing what the actors have to say. Because just because you write a piece of dialogue a certain way doesn't mean that somebody who's has to say it can say it that way, or can say it in a comfortable way. And I just in my head, I hear it a certain way, and when it comes out of somebody's mouth, it may be different. And it's always fascinating to see which lines really don't play and really are too tongue twistery, or really don't make as much sense as they do. And you have that option when you're in rehearsal live at that moment, and it's kind of an evolutionary process.
Well, you have a stage play that you're producing coming up in
Yeah, I have
Beverly
a play
Hills?
that I'm not producing it. It's a theater called Theater 40 in Beverly Hills. It's produced. They're producing it. They've been there a long time. It's a really good 99-seat theater, and they have a subscription, and they do a season. And this is the 5th out of the six plays of their 2016-17 season. It's called April, May, and June. And it's going on. It's going to run from March 16th through the middle of April 16th.
Okay.
And it's a story of 3 adult sisters who named April, May, and June. They're in their 40s. They're a year apart, and they convene at their late mother's house, which is the house they grew up in, to go through the very last of her things. And in doing so, they discover something about the mother that just blows their mind. And it's in a small way, it's a surprise, but it's in a small way connected to them and their own past. And it's kind of how they end up coming to terms with their image of the mother and the whole idea of we never quite know people as much as we think, particularly parents. And the sisters, who are 3 very different but very connected, close women, their relationship is really improved by this afternoon they spend in their childhood house. And it's just how they come to terms with each other and the image of the mother, and they can finally, close up the house and move on.
So when you sat down to write that, were you in the same mindset of, I just want to do something that's my own, or was there some other impetus?
Well, what happened was in this particular case, and this happens every so often with a film script particularly, I'll come up with a title. And I just happened to, the title April, May, and June just came into my head for some reason. I go, that's a good title. I should do something with that. And I don't know, I just started writing it. It ended up becoming a stage play. I wasn't exactly sure where it was going when I started. At a certain point, I realized there was going to be this revelation about the mother. I realized what the revelation I wanted it to be, and it kind of evolved from there. So it was kind of a unique process that way, as opposed to like having it completely structured and having a full outline and really knowing where I was going. And then, I wrote it and then edited it and ultimately got it to the place where I felt comfortable sending it out and showing it. But it was a very different process than the screenwriting that I do.
So is that common that you will just come up with a title and then work backwards?
Once in a while, I do that. Once in a while, it happens. Especially if this play is comedy drama. There's some, I hope good laughs in it, but there's also, a lot of tears in it as well. So, but on a lot of just straight comedies that I do, just higher concept comedies, I've come up with titles and then figured out the story to go with it. Now, if there was no story attached, I wouldn't continue writing it. And then there are movies that I've written that I've ended up changing the title many times over things. So it just, it depends. But once in a while, it's, you think about people say, how do you get the idea to write this? Or where'd you come up with, who thought of something like that? Well, we're writers and we write and we're storytellers and we're creators, but sometimes they come from strange places. It can be from something that you've observed. It can be from people that you know. It can be from just coming up with a phrase or in this case, a title. So it's just one of those weird things.
Referring back to the stage play that you've just written and are now showing, coming up in March, April, May, and June.
Right.
So you have the title. How long did it take you to finish?
Well, that particular play took a while because I was on a bunch of assignments, a bunch of TV movie assignments during the course of, well, 2 actually during that period. But I wrote it over the course of about 6 months. So every time I had a little downtime from the films I was writing, I went back to the play. Which is kind of a harder way to do it. I mean, usually I try to work on one thing and just go start to finish and then move on to the next thing so I can focus a little bit more. But in this particular case, I started and not quite knowing where it was going. So every time I came back to it, even if a few weeks had passed or whatever, it was like starting over again, but it actually worked in the play's favor because it became this very interesting kind of the way the story kind of spins out and the way the character stories and the dialogue spins out. It's slightly less linear than other things that I've written, which I kind of like. It's all one timeline, but there's a lot of conversation, and it doesn't all necessarily just follow, clink into place, which I think will be really interesting to hear. So that was a little bit different, but generally I like writing things, pretty much from start to finish, however long it would take. But if I had to compress all the time, I would say over the course of about a month to write it, 3 weeks maybe, and then there's all the rewriting, and now we're in rehearsals, and we're working on the words and tinkering and, seeing what things sound right and what don't, and what words we need a better word for, something that explains things better. It's the process. Yeah.
So someone who's used to writing in the typical screenwriting structured format, how would they switch gears a little bit? And maybe there's some books you can recommend on how to do stage plays.
Well, I basically think you can write a stage play pretty much, you can structure pretty much the way you structure a film. Most films have a classic structure, classic storytelling structure to them. By and large they do. And a plays, the nice thing about plays is that they can be this big sort of jumble of ideas and time frames and things that don't have to always be all that linear and all that structured. However, ultimately, if you even break down those, there is a structure to it. So I think if you go by classic storytelling structure, where let's say the midpoint of the movie is that point of acceleration where there's that new piece of information or that surprise or something that sends the story in a whole new direction. By the end of your first act of a 2-act play, basically that midpoint is like that oh my God moment, and the stage goes black and everybody walks out into the lobby like, oh, what's going to happen? That's kind of what you're looking for. You have a low point, probably the 3/4 point, the kind of all is lost moment. You have a quarter point, let's say, where it might be what's normally called in a script page 30 or the end of Act 1. But in a play, you have that kind of quarter point where the action kind of shifts and they're kind of off on the journey. Plays tend to have a lot of preamble to them. A lot of just conversation and getting to know characters, and until you sort of get into the meat of it, you're setting up the world in a little different way than you can in a film. So it can take a little while to get into the real meat of the story, but even then, I think in this play, at that quarter point, what would be the middle of the first act of the play, you end up with that kind of incident that kind of twists it and moves it in that slightly new direction that leads to the end of the first act with the moment of acceleration. So I think that it's not a dissimilar structure, and frankly, I'm so used to writing things in so many films in basically classic structure that it's sort of second nature in terms of how I'm going to write a play. But plays do have more freedom, generally.
Just like with the actress that kind of gave you a hug at the end and was interested in the way you approached it and structure versus what she had been used to sort of working with. What do you want an audience member to get from one of your plays, aside from showing up, which I'm sure is great? That's a great thing, show up. Get people in the seats. Yeah. But aside from that, when the curtain goes down and they come out and bow, what do you want them to experience?
I'd like them to feel that they spent an hour and a half or 2 hours with people that they knew, with people that they could relate to. I've written a lot of plays that are very character-oriented, very people-oriented, a lot of family and relationship comedies and things. And you just want people to feel like they've experienced something that they can really relate to. And in this particular case, in April, May, and June, so many people have gone through that experience of, like everybody's either a child or has been a child and or a parent. Often you've lost a parent. By the time you get to a theater, you're probably of an age where maybe you've lost a parent or you've lost a grandparent or somebody who has. So I think there's a lot of relatable things. And then the sibling part of it, I want people to say, that reminds me of my sisters or my brothers or my cousins or that's just like cousin so-and-so or whatever. I think there'll be a lot of that kind of recognition. So I want people to be moved, by the characters that I've created and the kind of relating to the whole idea of that, yes, we don't always know our parents and our parents don't always know us, and maybe they'll go home and spend a little time talking to their parents before it's too late. Ask that question. Tell me about that thing that I don't know. Say to your mother, say to your father, if you were to die tomorrow, what would I discover going through your things that you'd rather tell me about now? So I won't have a lot of questions. So I think there's a lot of food for thought, that hopefully out of this play will come. And generally with plays, I just want people to feel not just that they had a good time and whatever, but they really got something out of it. There was an emotional connection that they got out of it, that they can then take with them and it can resonate. So.
How often do you write?
Oh, that's a good question. People always say, like, how can you be so disciplined to just sit in your office and write all the time? Well, I don't write all the time, for starters. But I always say, if I don't write, it doesn't happen. Not like going into an office and having a job and having specific tasks and things like that and having meetings set up for you. I mean, if you write, writing on a TV staff is a little different, but if you're basically writing, whether it's on spec or writing on assignment and you're in your own space, you have to get the work done. You have to create, your schedule. So I find that when I'm on a tighter deadline, I write much more. I write much faster. I'm up earlier. I'm up later. A certain amount of adrenaline takes over where you just get it done. If I'm not on an assignment, if I'm writing something for myself, or I've got a little time for something, or I'm preparing for a meeting that's a week away instead of tomorrow, I'll take a little bit more time. But basically every day, I'm always in work mode. And I'm always working on something, writing something, putting pitches together, working on rewriting. I always go back and rewrite old scripts that I think still have life in them that we can maybe try to sell. As scripts have strange lives to them. They have 9 lives in some respects, because you can write something. I have scripts that I've written 10, even 15 years ago that didn't sell then, but suddenly there's a reason that something's out in the zeitgeist now that if I just make some tweaks and sort of modernize it a little bit or update it, it may have a life to it, and I do that a lot. So when I have a little downtime, I always go back to the old scripts. But I've had a long stretch of pretty regular assignment work, so that has kind of kept me in a pretty dedicated and consistent work mode. But let's put it this way: I'm much happier and much saner when I'm writing a lot, and free time is fine, but I just enjoy having that project that I'm working on. So I try to write as much as I can.
Were you always that dedicated and structured? I mean, was that something over time that developed?
I've always been pretty, like, whatever jobs I've had, I've been organized, and even in school I was organized. Not like fanatically, but I'm pretty good at sort of knowing how to sort of get things done in a quick way and not lose too much time. Prioritizing is very important, and because when you have a limited amount of time to get something done, you really have to kind of be careful that you're not getting lost in the minutia of things, and really stay focused on the bigger picture and the overarching story and the bigger structure of something than playing with every little word. You can get as a writer, you can get so lost in what somebody I know once very accurately called swirling the words, where you just, you get the script written and then you're spending all this time making every word perfect and, rearranging things, and we all want things to be as great and as what we consider perfect as possible. But then a movie gets made and there are millions of changes along the way, and tons of things are cut, and sometimes what's being done, sometimes you don't know what's being done. So you have to really over the course of time, I've learned to really manage the time I spend on things and not get too caught up in the minutia of things, which is kind of easy to do. But I'm pretty good at organization and getting things done, and I'm fairly quick. I can write fairly quick. I can rewrite fairly quickly. Over the course of time, I perseverate a lot less on a script or a story or a pitch. Like I said, I want it to be great, but I'm sort of good at letting things breathe and evolve a little bit more to get to the point that they need to be.
How do you know if you're getting caught up in the minutia? Because I think as creative people, we think it's something huge, but really it's not.
It's very easy to get lost.
Right.
Especially, again, if you're not on a schedule or you're not on a timetable or you're not watching the clock, it's very easy to get lost. Now, by the same token, I'm a big believer in, like, sometimes you just have to just write stuff out and just have it in your head and just get it down on the page and not edit yourself, just sort of, like blow it out. And I think sometimes that's very helpful to get to the essence, to find the essence of what you're really trying to do. But I think it comes just with experience, frankly. I think it's really just the more things you've written and the more ways you understand how to best tell and structure a story so that it'll be the most effective, that it'll hit the marks that somebody's hiring you is looking for. If you're working for a film company or a network or a producer who has certain paradigms, mandates, things that work best for them, you focus on those things, because there's just some when you're writing for other people, sometimes there's just so much of yourself that can be in that script. You're trying to fill a number of boxes. and it's a little different than just writing something on spec or like writing a stage play, which is for you. So you learn how to adjust the amount of time you spend on things, what you focus on, what is important, what's probably less important, what's going to change, what's probably not going to change, because we have a finite amount of time to do things.
Gary, if writing was not your career, would you still write? And what would you write?
That's an interesting question. You know, people often say, like, people are always asked, if you weren't an actor, what would you do? If you weren't a chef, what would you do? It's hard to say, because I was always a writer. I always loved words. My mother was somebody who was like very word oriented, and if you'd use a word wrong, she'd correct you. And she was a big crossword puzzle person and Scrabble, and I sort of learned a lot of my love of words from her. My grandfather, in an era where men didn't necessarily take a great interest in, you know, all things intellectual, he was a crossword puzzle fanatic, and he actually created his own crossword puzzle encyclopedia, like dictionaries basically, that he hand wrote in the most beautiful handwriting, and I still have them to this day. And I was really young when he was alive, but he really taught me a lot about words, and I learned a lot about words from his love of words. So that was something that came to me from an early age. When I was in high school, I was a film reviewer for the high school paper. I wrote different articles for the high school paper. I wrote for the literary magazine. I was a staff writer on my college paper. I was always working. I worked a lot in the journalism world, which I still do. So I've always loved that kind of writing. So I guess it's kind of where I was meant to be. I had a first career out of college as a publicist, movie publicist, and I did that for a while, and I enjoyed it. And it actually was, interestingly, it actually combined my love of movies and writing. But because I was promoting movies, and the word was so important in terms of getting things out to people, whether it was a pitch, whether it was a conversation, whether it was a press release, whatever. But at a certain point, I realized I had to get back to my first love, which was writing. And so I left that world, and I started writing TV scripts and started getting work in television, episodic television, which then sort of moved me into movies, and then stage plays, and then TV movies, and all of that. So it's evolved a lot over time.
Looking back to those years as a publicist, and I don't know what those years were, what do you see as a different landscape, and maybe a tougher landscape or easier for people trying to promote their films today?
Oh, well, you've got social media. I mean, when I started, social media was kind of, it was sort of in the nascent stages, and, but really wasn't part of things. People were still, faxing things. It was kind of a different period. Now, I think, and even like with this play or anything else that I'm doing, between Facebook and Twitter and any kind of social media, or the internet itself, you can just do so much more promotion, so much more sort of homegrown promotion that costs very little, if anything. So that's a big deal, so you don't have to depend upon running newspaper ads to promote something, or radio ads or whatever. I still think all that's really important, but if you have the budget. But when you're doing a smaller project, it's not always the place for that. So you've got social media and the internet, which is a huge thing, which you didn't have back then. I think it makes a big difference.
But on the flip side, would you say in some sense that could also be a detriment, because now there's so many things competing for people's attention?
Yes.
That stuff is so short-lived?
Yeah, it is. Well, if you look at television, there are 500 TV series altogether on every platform. The eyeballs are so diffused. Ratings are so much less. Individual ratings are so much less. There's just so much more to take people's attention. So yes, the entertainment landscape is more difficult than it used to be because of all the different options that people have. But things find their place. When it comes to theater, people still go to the theater. When it comes to movies, in a movie theater, people still go to the movies in a movie theater. All of that, people still watch network television. So it's just about keeping people focused on it, and it's who's making the most noise. Is really what it is. So because we have all this new media, and because we have so many opportunities to promote things and get the word out, and word of mouth, the concept of word of mouth has always been around. People have said, oh, what makes a successful movie? Oh, it's just really word of mouth. It's not necessarily reviews or this or that, it's word of mouth. Somebody saying, I saw this, I loved it, you've got to go see it. So you still have that, and there are new ways of getting that word of mouth out now. So it's probably a trade-off in a way, But ultimately, I think it's probably easier to promote things now.
I know we wanted to speak to you primarily about writing, but
Mm.
just a couple quick questions regarding from the eyes of the publicist. I know you don't do that anymore, but what did you see with a lot of filmmakers? And I realize a lot has changed in whatever 10 years or however it's been, but what do you see from a lot of filmmakers that were some mistakes and then some things that were very positive that they did to promote their film?
Oh, well, a lot of filmmakers, when I was doing publicity, and it may be the same now, I don't know, but a lot of filmmakers were kind of against the concept of publicity or promotion or anything that seemed to cheapen the movie. You know, we want the movie to stand on its own or speak for itself. Nowadays, you know, and sometimes you could do things to promote the movie, and other times you were more limited, depending upon the kind of movie it was. Now, I would suspect that people are much more interested in promotion because it is so much harder to get people in to see things, and there is so much more, you know, visual traffic out there. So probably, hopefully, they're more open to it. And also because there's so much more media now available to promote something, I think, and also, you know, a lot of interviews sometimes are done, Q&As, they're done by emailing in, you know, your answers and things like that. So it's a little bit easier, and for a lot of people who aren't that comfortable doing interviews, or actors who are uncomfortable do it, or in a different location and can't do it. So hopefully they're just more open to what's out there, and the fact that you have to promote things to get people in there. You know, people just don't find things. They don't just discover things anymore. And, you know, and you don't have the time to have things sit there to be discovered. If a movie nobody sees it that first weekend, it's gone. You know, and a play is not dissimilar. And the only books seem to have a little bit more time to kind of grow and get the word of mouth out. They don't have to take it out of a theater or something. They just have to keep it on the shelf, and, you know, hopefully there's room on the shelf, on the bookstore shelf, or certainly on the Amazons or the websites. You know, it's infinite amounts of room. So I think, you know, in that world, you know, it's still pretty safe. But yeah, I think promotion is very important, and I always encourage people to, you know, to promote their work, because you want people to see it. You know, you don't write, unless you're writing for yourself or writing in a vacuum, you know, you want, it's a lot of work. You want people to see it and enjoy it.
Well, do you notice that it seems like maybe more the actors or the producers are fine with doing promotion and interviews, but the writer-director wants to stay removed?
Well, I can't speak for directors, but writers, you know, the writer nature, the kind of basic writer nature is generally at least looked at or thought of as being, you know, more low-key, more reserved, quieter, more of a loner. You're in your office or your room writing all the time by yourself. You know, it's a little different mindset, a little different hat that you're wearing. And so a lot of writers are just not as comfortable doing that. But these are the same writers that have to go into meetings and pitch an idea and put on a show, basically, for an executive or producer to try to sell something, and are good at that. So it's really not that much different. You know, you're still putting yourself out there, having to speak. I mean, some people are just more comfortable in front of you know, in front of an audience, you know, than other people are. But yeah, I think writers, it's probably not quite. It's certainly not as kind of inherent in, you know, in who they are versus like an actor to go out and promote something.
And what about the filmmakers who feel that it in some sense cheapens their work by promoting it? And I get how someone could feel that, but also people want to see who created something.
Yes, of course. I mean, I think if it's some movie that there's some cheap promotional stunt is being done that's sort of crass or something, yeah, I mean, there's no reason for that, but they're probably not going to do that for the movie, unless it happens to be a movie where that would, you know, that's the tone of the movie and that would work. By and large, you know, the concept of promoting movies or TV shows or books or plays or anything, it's usually high quality interviews and high quality things that will get people to go see something. So, you know, I think sometimes you can't look too deeply into all of that. You just do it and hope that people respond.
And then lastly, when someone is interviewed and they're about to, you know, meet the press or go to a junket, whatever, how much should they know their own backstory and really have something interesting to give people about who they are personally? Not just the film and want to thank the actors and all that, but people really want to know stuff about the filmmaker.
Well, I think again, I can speak for screenwriters, I think as a writer, it's really important to kind of remember why you wrote something, how you got to write it, what it means to you. You know, sometimes, especially if we write a lot of things, we can forget what each individual project, why it's important to us, or what motivated us to do it, or what our intention was. It's very important to kind of reconnect with that. I think before you do an interview. I think the writer brings a very unique perspective to talking about a film, because the film exists because something was written. So it's kind of the foundation. So you've created this. You basically, unless you're adapting something, you've pretty much created the world that this film was then created from. So I think you have to be aware of that foundation, be able to talk about again where it came from. You asked me about where this play came from, and the title and all of that. I mean, everybody's got their story. So I think you have to be aware of your backstory, and then what your intentions are, and what you hope people will get from what they see of your work, and what again what your real intention is in putting together a story.
Do you remember the first time someone paid you to write?
Oh God, yeah. My very first paid assignment was an episode of Saved by the Bell, the Saturday morning TV show. And it's a funny story because the show had, I think it was like its second season. It was a long time, it was right when I first started writing. And I remember my agent said, well, there's this show, it's a Saturday morning kids show, it's a live action show. That they need writers. They like to writing samples. You want to go in and pitch, and I go, well, why are you sending me there? I want to write, whatever it was back there, Cheers or Murphy Brown or what. I want to write one of those. He goes, just go, just go. It'll be fun, and they'll probably hire you, whatever. So I go in, I pitched a ton of stories. They picked one, they liked it, and they shot it, and it was a nice experience. Well, on the aside from just first getting my first credit and all of that, that episode has rerun 50,000 times on one platform or another. The show became very successful. It became like this iconic show of its period. It went on to DVD, and so the episode is on all the DVDs. And to this day, I can write something that was really successful. And the one thing somebody will say to me when I tell them I wrote Saved by the Bell, I love that show. I remember your episode. Oh my God, wait till I tell so-and-so that you wrote that episode of Saved by the Bell. It's really funny. So it turned out to be a great first assignment, little did I know, but that was the first time I was actually paid as a screenwriter.
And which episode was it?
I wrote an episode called Save the Max, which was about the kids unearth the old high school radio station that they find in a basement or something, and they use it to create a telethon, kind of radiothon, to save their diner, the Max, which is going to close because they're going out of business or something. And that was it. And it's just funny because people they know it and they remember it. It's like culty almost, So I just say, if it makes sense, take the job, because you never know what's going to come of it.
Right. And so going back to that first time, knowing that you did get the job, what was going through your head like the night of? Yeah, when you found
when I found out that I got the job.
Right.
Oh, it was huge because I had just started writing, and I had been working a lot writing spec scripts and going on meetings and things like that, and I had the job I had. I was doing pretty well in it, and I just kind of figured when I left that job, I've gotten jobs. It hasn't been that hard to find jobs. I'll do this and I'll get a job. I wasn't prepared for how difficult it was, and maybe if I was, I wouldn't have done it. So I just went in like optimistic and full steam ahead. So to get my first writing job relatively soon after I started, left that other job and started writing, it felt like this is a huge accomplishment, and it was fun. And I didn't write a second episode, any other episodes for them, but I did go back in there and pitch a few times, and it was very exciting. But you know what? To this day, when somebody says yes to something, it's the greatest feeling. It's such validation, and you're just so proud of the fact that you came up with an idea, somebody liked it, somebody's gonna get to write it, you're gonna get to tell your story. It's always exciting.
When you left that other job, did you have a specific plan in place? Like, okay, I'm gonna give myself this much time. If it doesn't work out, then here's plan B. Mm-hmm. What was your?
I never had a plan B. The funny family story. My sister, after I left the job, and after doing this for a few years, and it definitely had its ups and downs, she said to me, well, do you have a plan B? And I said, no, this is my plan B. My plan A was that other job, then that didn't work out for me, so my plan B actually became my plan A, so that's it. And I just always stuck it out. I mean, you know, I always, you know, I loved writing. I never got the don't quit your day job. I got enough work along the way to know I should keep doing it until things ultimately became more consistent. And I always did other writing work to fill in between, you know, whether it was journalism work or press kit writing or publicity writing or whatever. I was always writing something. So in between all the script writing, just to sort of keep going and to make money. You know, I just never gave up. And I just always believed in the possibility of success, whatever level it was. You know, I mean, I think you have to manage your expectation in terms of what your place may be in the food chain. You know, I love writing. There's really not much else I'd want to do. I'd love to, you know, be a chef. I'd love to be a psychiatrist. I mean, a psychologist. I mean, there are lots of things I'm interested in. But you know, when it comes to you know, to my passion, you know, it's really writing.
Can we talk about how you sold your first screenplay? What was it?
Oh, okay, sure. I had been writing television. I had been writing episodic television and getting assignments and things, but I didn't get on staff on a show. It was hard to do. It was at the time where they gave out more freelance assignments on TV shows than they do now, but still, the whole point was to get on staff on a show, and I was just finding that wasn't necessarily the direction everything was moving in. So I decided to start writing screenplays because I always loved movies, and that's kind of what I started off wanting to do, but I felt TV would be kind of a good way to enter the business and something a little more accessible, which I think it was. But I started just writing a screenplay. So I took a couple of courses about writing a screenplay. I took a great class called Writer's Boot Camp, which I ended up teaching for a long time, a few years after I took it. And I wrote a few scripts and sort of got on I think they got attention, a few got optioned, things happened. And then ultimately I just kept writing spec screenplays. You know, I mean, you have to keep writing if you're not getting assignment work and you have the time to write, you know, to write on spec, you have to keep cranking things out. So at that particular point in the movie business, a lot of this was a little bit after the big $1 million spec sales and all of that, where, you know, like everything was selling. But I sort of missed that wave. But high concept comedies were kind of in. You know, they were, you could sell them. You know, they had to be good. They had to be a good idea, but they were saleable. Now it's different. I mean, now the studios are making fewer of them. It's harder to sell those now, unless there's like a big star attached to it. But back then, it was just kind of like the bread and butter. I mean, everybody wanted those scripts. So I wrote a script called Manhattan Transfer, which was about a New York radio shrink, sort of a shock jock of a radio shrink, who on one day starts taking on the neuroses of all of his callers. At the time that he's making the very week he's making the leap from local radio to national television as a shrink, as a TV shrink. And it's just the story of how he gets through this period of time, and he hooks up with his old graduate school girlfriend, who turns out to be his young son's school psychologist, and she kind of helps him as a psychologist on this journey of getting through this crazy week when he's taken on the transference of all of his clients' neuroses. And his whole thing as the shock jock is neuroses are all in your head. There is no such thing. And now he's cursed by the ghost of Sigmund Freud. And he comes to him in the middle of the night and says, you know, you're really hurting people by your saying that there's no such thing as neuroses. So you're going to start feeling everything that all of your people are feeling and that you've been mocking all this time. And then he wakes up and it starts to happen. And it's a very, very funny script and a very funny story. And it was ultimately bought by, at the time, by Davis Entertainment for 20th Century Fox. And I worked with Fox and Davis developing the script. I did different drafts of the script. They kept re-optioning it, and ultimately it just sort of never went anywhere after that. So I got it back. But it's just a great, you know, big, broad character comedy. So I'm hoping one day it'll find its place. But that was the first sale, and very shortly after that, I had my second sale, which was just kind of amazing that it all happened at once. It was an independent film. It was a spec script that I wrote called Who's on First. It was a romantic comedy, and it was ultimately bought by an independent film company, and they made the film under the title If You Only Knew. So like within like 1 year or 6 months or something, I was able to sell these 2 scripts. The film that was made, it took a little while to get made. It took a few years, over the course of a few years, to get made and released. But yeah, that was really kind of a fun beginning. And the whole point is, when you sell something, is to be able to parlay that into selling something else. So I got a lot of meetings at the time, and you know, I sort of got on the radar of things. And you try to work that, you know, try to get other work from it, and all of that. So it was good.
When you talked about previously having these scripts that you've written, but they've sort of in their 5th life, you know, what are you doing to know if it's the right time? You said it's sort of whatever's out in the ether. Are you looking through the news every morning?
Well, it's more a general sense, but I mean, I think, for example, this script, Manhattan Transfer, which I ended up changing the title to Reverse Psychology over time. You know, there are different places now that will make, maybe it's not a feature film, maybe it's, you know, a movie for Crackle or some internet or streaming service that's starting to produce their own comedies. Yeah, there's that whole concept. Like, what else is out there where you can now sell this kind of material and, you know, just update it for, you know, for where we are today. There's that. I wrote a script a long time ago called Red Hot Mamas, which was about 3 women of a certain age, single women of a certain age, who end up winning a trip to a Caribbean island, and they take the trip together, not realizing that they're landing there smack in the middle of college spring break. And it's a story about how these women in their late 40s end up being pursued by these college guys who are 20. You know, it's a little American Pie-ish or whatever. But that was, you know, it was a funny script. You know, didn't sell back then. Now there's this whole, you know, big proliferation of you know, women's comedies, broad women's comedies, from Bridesmaids to Bad Moms. They're making Bad Moms Christmas coming up this year. There's a movie that was at Sundance, I think, called Mom's Lunch Out, or something about Mom's Great Lunch or something, that got a lot of attention. So we're out again with Red Hot Mamas. We've retitled it MILFs, and it's what I did was I rewrote it a little bit ago, and I kind of cut the young guys a bit and sort of amped up the women's roles more. So it's really the women's story. The guys are there, the story is similar, but I kind of really focused on the women more and did more work on them. And we're out with it again, you know, trying to get interest in it because fun women's comedies, women empowerment comedies, women of a certain age, you know, doing crazy things. There's a market for it now. So there's that kind of thing. So that was something that evolved over time. You know, Bridesmaids was just, you know, it could have been a one-off, and it turned out to be something that really affected and changed, you know, the film business in a way, the comedy business, and certainly Melissa McCarthy from that. She changed a bit of the face of comedy. What studios are making, you know, when it comes to comedy, you know. So there's a new, you know, so there's that, you know, there's that kind of thing that's out in the zeitgeist. So basically, sometimes, you know, if it's based on a true story, you know, sometimes, like I have the rights to a book called Rescuing Riley, which is about a true story about a man who rescues a dog from a canyon, and how he saves the dog's life, and how the dog kind of saves his life emotionally as a result of it. It's a wonderful book, and we've been out with it trying to get it set up and all of that. And then A Dog's Purpose was coming out, and I said to my agent, you know, A Dog's Purpose is I read the book, it's a, you know, great book, I knew the film would be good, I had a feeling it would do well, get a lot of attention. I said, everybody's going to be looking for their dog movie. You know, this might be a good time to really put a push on Rescuing Riley, so it's out there again in a bigger way. Yeah, that kind of thing, you know, because it is a roller coaster, and you never know. I mean, some scripts that I've written, some screenplays, they're dated, and, you know, the topic just doesn't work anymore, and, you know, you just put them aside.
What would you consider as your biggest success thus far, and where were you in your life when it occurred?
Oh, it's an interesting story. I may have to think about that.
Okay.
My big success. Well, you know, I wrote over the course of about 6 years. I wrote a total of 13 movies in a row for the Hallmark Channel. And what happened there was I had written a spec screenplay called The Wish List that I wrote as kind of a big romantic comedy, star-driven romantic comedy as a feature, and it didn't sell. But it was a really funny script. It was very high concept, great characters, and just at that time, this is probably, 2008, maybe 2009. It went to the Hallmark Channel because they were looking for romantic comedies, high concept romantic comedies, and they were this programming was shifting a little bit. And if I could get it made as a TV movie, I was thrilled. I just wanted the movie to be seen, the movie to be made. And they read it, they really liked it, and it ended up being picked up by them. I rewrote it for them, rewrote it to sort of make it a little more Hallmark Channel friendly, and it was a hit. It did really well. I was very proud of it. They were very happy with it. And then I just got hired to, over the course of the years to do some adaptations, to pitch original things. I had 3 other original screenplays that I wrote that they ended up buying, and I ended up, there were spec scripts that I ended up repurposing for them. One was a holiday film called Hitched for the Holidays, which was a really, really fun, funny sort of comedy of errors, romantic comedy of errors set around the holidays, and that was on about in 2012, I think. So it was a really great. I mean, I love doing the work for them, and I'm continuing to do other things for them. But this run of work was very. I was just, it was really a high point for me. To be able to work regularly. I was saying in this business, if you can work and get paid fairly regularly, you're doing okay. I mean. There are going to be the people who, making the millions of dollars all the time. But basically, if you're working pretty regularly, and getting things made, you're doing well. So I was really, really proud of that. So to me, that's probably my major accomplishment, being able to write so many films over the course of a relatively short period of time. And I wrote a couple of stage plays in between, and I wrote a pilot as well in between that period. And I rewrote a holiday movie for what was ABC Family Channel at the time during this whole period. Just being able to work regularly on a lot of things and see things made, to see as many things made as I was fortunate enough to see during this particular period, was, I think, really my favorite accomplishment and what I'm maybe most proud of.
So it's interesting because it sounds like that was during the Great Recession. When
well, it's very funny.
Most people's low point.
Yes, in fact, you know what? This happened shortly. This all started happening after the writer's strike was over. The writer's strike was, I think, 2007 at the beginning of 2008, and they bought that script either the end of 2008 or the beginning of 2009, at a time when people were not working. I was working much less before the writer's strike, and then after the writer's strike, it was just accidental. It was just fluky. But it is kind of ironic that, at a time where the studios were pulling back on everything and the networks were pulling back, and it took a long time for writers to sort of get back into a groove and all of that, to get back to a new normal. Not that long after that, my career really sort of hit its stride. So it's kind of interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
We were just speaking briefly off camera about just how someone can be, let's say, for lack of a better word, hot in one sort of genre or style of film, and then struggle to find work because that's just not part of movie culture anymore.
Yeah, there's a shelf life, I think, to not necessarily one's ability, but one's purview, in terms of what you write. The genres come and go, certainly if you write superhero movies these days, or things based on graphic novels or things like that, or if you write horror or whatever, there's always a place for that. But because of the way the films that are made at studios now, how different it is than it used to be, over the course of time, how much everything has to be either much bigger or very, very star-driven or comic book driven or something, it's a little harder, to kind of make your mark in movies than it used to be. And people who were very successful selling a lot of spec screenplays, back in the day, and getting high concept comedies made or whatever, they had a great run, but a lot of those people had to reinvent themselves or just were not able to, because of having to move into TV or something like that, which is great. I mean, TV is, people say TV is where all the great stuff is being done, but you always have to reinvent yourself. You can't rest on your laurels no matter how successful you are, because things can disappear very, very quickly, and it may have nothing to do with you. It's just the, kind of just the uncertainty of the business and the changes in the business and the financial changes that happen and all of that. So you have to kind of be very open to knowing, first of all, when you're doing something and you're successful, you have to really be grateful and really remember that this may disappear tomorrow. So enjoy every second, because it doesn't come around that often. So that's the number one thing. But after that, you have to be really open to what else is out there and what else you can do. And that's important. You have to have a little foresight with that, which we didn't always have to. Now things have changed a bit for that.
And how do you think we can kind of get our finger on the pulse of what could be? I mean, I know, besides being Steve Jobs,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, if you come up with if there's something out there in the zeitgeist right now, you could say by the time you pitch it, there are 15 of those movies in production or 7 TV pilots that have just been bought. So it's very hard to you have to be a little ahead of the curve, but not so far ahead of the curve that people don't know what you're talking about, or it's too much of a jump, and not right in the middle of the curve because everybody else is probably doing it. So it's hard. I mean, I think it's, a lot of it is just luck. A lot of it is just coming up with an idea that just happens to hit, and it's just right before there's something out there in the world that's going to affect it. So you want to kind of be a little ahead of the curve. How you figure out how to get ahead of the curve is difficult. Sometimes there's a trend that's starting to happen or something about, and it doesn't have to be anything that's that esoteric. It's just like, where is the world sort of moving toward a little bit, but then you don't want to be too ahead of the curve because it seems too risky or people don't really get it. And then if you miss the curve altogether, which is very easy to do because things happen so quickly, then sometimes you just lose out. But it's hard to predict. I mean, they always say you should by and large write what you feel you can write best, what you're most passionate about, what means the most to you, and everything else sort of will fall into place. It'll find its place. You just have to have the patience to after you write it to sometimes it takes a longer time than others for things to find the place, or for that curve to come back again. That world to come back again. That's right for your script.
The definition of high concept, sometimes I struggle with it myself, and then I hear it and I go, okay, and then I forget. So.
Well, generally, it's considered an idea that that's very easily understandable in a sentence or a couple of sentences. If you're pitching something, pitch a high concept. 3 secretaries conspired to murder their boss, 9 to 5. An actor dresses as a woman to get a job on a soap opera because he can't get any other work, and learns to appreciate women more as a result of it. Tootsie. I mean, that kind of thing. Something that has a high. Now, again, those movies are a little less popular now. Those high concept comedies or those high concept ideas, but you still need a concept that is strong and simple to understand and for people to get. How will they market it? What will be on the poster? What will be in the trailer? For just people to get it, and it doesn't have to be anything that wild or that imaginative, but it just has to be relatively simple to state. Otherwise, sometimes ideas get so complicated that they get very convoluted, and that shows up in the writing and sometimes the film itself. So it's about keeping it simple but interesting and I don't know, for lack of a better word, clever and unique.
So can someone sort of bounce that idea off someone that, like, hey, this is sort of the log line for my script or whatever, and if the person just doesn't get it, then they know I need to refine it.
Right, exactly. Okay. I mean, I've definitely gone in to pitch ideas, whether it's for a film or a TV pilot or something, and I think I get it, and I think it's a good idea, and then somebody will say, well, I like the idea. It's a little It's going to get a little complicated though because of A, B, and C, And to me, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I get it. I know what the idea, I can totally see how this idea can work. But if I were to write that idea myself, and sometimes I'll go back and try to outline it a little bit just to test it, and I'll realize, yeah, it is a little complicated. It sounds high concept. It sounds simple and fun, and you can see what the movie is. You can see the whole movie. It's like a carpet that rolls out in front of you. You can just see the whole thing, what it is. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is more complicated than you think. So there has to be kind of sometimes people will say, God, I wish I thought of that idea. Something's just this simple, beautiful in the simplicity, and yet, again, 3 secretaries conspired to murder their boss, a comedy. I mean, it's just something that's just simple and people relate to and people get. I've written a lot of high concept comedies, and it's just kind of hard to explain. It's like one of those things, you know it when you hear it.
Right.
But like, my movie Manhattan Transfer, I gave you the log lines, the high concept. Radio shrink starts to take on the neuroses of all of his callers on the most important week of his life. You see what the movie's about. It's a high concept. But they're hard to come by. Nowadays, they don't make quite as many of those as films. They don't make quite as many of those high concept movies. Often were comedies. Sometimes they were, Die Hard was high concept. Lethal Weapon was a high concept. You could express the idea of the movie in a sentence or two, and you totally got it. That's kind of what it is. You may see more of that on television now. I don't know. Anytime I'm going in to pitch something, I'm trying to go in. Try to go in and pitch something that's relatively clear and simple to understand, in terms of what the world is going to be, where the entertainment value is going to come from, where the conflict can be, and a lot of that is just inherent in those couple of sentences. And sometimes it makes a good film or TV series, sometimes it doesn't. It's not everything. But if you've got a good character attached to it, chances are you have a good shot of at least having a good piece of material from it.
So if it's too wordy,
right.
it needs
right.
to be reduced.
Yeah, and like anything, that when you start explaining anything to somebody, and if people who are not sort of natural pitchers of stories, or don't do it for a living or whatever, somebody will come to me and they'll say, I just had the most amazing experience. You've got to write a movie about this. I said, what is it? And they'll say, well, okay, I was standing on a street corner, and before you know it, they're talking for 20 minutes about this story. You're lost. You got lost at minute 4, and there's no story to it, or you think there's something funny, but it's just too complicated. What's the movie? What's the story? Why am I going to laugh? What do I do with that? There's a lot of that. So yeah, you have to keep it simple, and unique.
Let's talk about dialogue. Do you tell the characters what to say, or are you almost hearing them tell you?
It's a good question. I think in dialogue, they kind of say that you can't really teach somebody how to write dialogue. You can show somebody how to write more tightly or more naturally, but basically dialogue is something that you either have a feel for or you don't. I mean, it's not like teaching structure or something like that. I think it's a combination of the two things you said. I think your characters are speaking to you. Hopefully you've created a unique enough character, or a character with a strong enough sense of who they are, or what their, how you would describe that character and what their journey is going to be, emotional journey is going to be, that the words they don't write themselves necessarily, but it's like the track that the train is running on. So you know what the character is about, you know where they're going to go, you know what they're doing right, you know what they're doing wrong, and what you want them to be and how they talk needs to match that basis of who they are. If that's clear. So there's that. You find that when you start writing dialogue, sometimes the characters talk differently than you'd expect. That evolves, and that can be very interesting. And sometimes your character changes as a result of your dialogue. But by and large, we're using our voices, we're using voices of people we know, we're using cadences, we're using regional, words. It's a combination of a lot of things, but it does, in a way, it does write itself. You're the driver, but it does kind of roll out. But again, a dialogue, it's about how do you write natural dialogue? How do you write the way people really speak? And it's cadence, and it's simplicity of words. It's expressing, saying the most amount of ideas and the least amount of letters, basically, the least amount of words, and to keep it all moving forward. So it's hard. I think you kind of either write good dialogue or you don't. I think it's a tough one.
Well, for your stage plays, is rehearsal really the only place that you can kind of try out to see if that dialogue for the character works?
Yeah, rehearsals are critical. We're reading through the play. My director's dividing the play into beats and sections, and we're really focusing on, after we've read through it all together, now we're focusing on the individual words and to see exactly what's working, and what words really don't quite make sense, or what did I have in my mind that the actresses aren't necessarily feeling or getting, or they don't quite know how to say it, or the director isn't sure. And that's an amazing process. It's like a fantastic process. So being able to hone the words, it's kind of rare. Just doing a table read of your script before something is produced, which doesn't always happen, is really, really helpful. You have to hear other voices other than the ones in your head. You have to hear them say the words.
So it sounds like for scripts, then you wouldn't always get a chance. You might just get notes back.
Right, you get a lot of notes back, but if you know unless you on your own before you turn in a script gather some actors and try to test it out, you can do that. But by and large, you write a script, you turn it in, you get notes, and then the notes come with dialogue issues. I don't understand this line, this isn't funnier, love that line, this works, this doesn't, could you add a little bit, put a little twist on it, that's duplicated, that kind of thing. Which is very helpful. And it's all like, I look at the scripts as just this big piece of clay that you're constantly molding and shaping, and it's just sort of moving with and trying to find the shape to it until you have your the piece of pottery that you're trying to make. It's a lot of changes. They always say writing is rewriting, and that's really and that's so important. I'm a big believer in rewriting. I'm fine about rewriting as long as it makes sense, and it's not just to do it. Because you do make things better. You can't get it on one fell swoop. At least I can't. You have to write and rewrite and sort of really work on it and really think about it and get some distance from the material too. So that you can sort of look at it with your own fresh eyes, and you have a much better sense of what works and what doesn't work.
I find some of the most interesting dialogue just being in LA and hearing two people for maybe like less than a minute.
Right.
And you could take so much from that.
Right.
Do you ever do that? Because you could build a whole
all the time.
world
I'm
off that.
always hearing things, writing things down, writing down expressions like, oh my God, what a great expression. What does that mean? I'm going to take that. Just the dynamic between people, kinds of relationships. Who's talking to who at the supermarket, listening to a couple arguing or being too nice to each other or whatever it is. It's fascinating. I'm always writing things down. Yeah.
So in terms of being a writer and wanting to add that dialogue, how much are you paying attention to seeing a couple in a restaurant, let's say, and maybe little is being said and you can tell there's like some tension or something?
Right. Well, a lot is said without being said at all. There's always that, and subtext is very important in your writing. So you're not just, it's not just, the dialogue has like some depth to it, and what they're saying is not necessarily what they mean. They're saying A to really mean B because their intention is C. There's that, so there are different layers to the dialogue. And sometimes, honestly, you don't know about that until you write it and until you look back on it and say, wow, that was kind of interesting, or like that speech didn't really go in the direction I thought it would, and yet it's kind of an interesting twist. But you just try to make it real. You try to make it the way real people interact in real situations. If it's that kind of, certainly if it's that kind of movie.
So do you recommend that to other writers in terms of getting enriching dialogue?
Yes, pay attention. Pay attention to the world around you. And something I watch. I'll watch a movie or something on TV or whatever, and I'll look at like the run of dialogue. It'll just be a phenomenal speech, and by phenomenal piece of dialogue. I loved The Newsroom, the Aaron Sorkin show, the HBO show, and I would literally just look at just play back over and over the certain sections of that show and the way that dialogue was constructed. And he's such a genius in terms of constructing dialogue and the words that he has as people use. But you can learn so much from that. You can be so inspired and then put your own voice into that kind of thing. And again, a lot of writing dialogue is cadence and personality and things like that. And trying to have characters sound different, so that not every character sounds exactly the same. You give every character their own voice, which is tricky. It's hard to do, but that's also really important. And you have to create character, beneath, character that's kind of driving that dialogue for that, even if it's just a supporting character, somebody we don't see very much. But yeah, you gotta pay attention to what's around you. It's the best things are out of reality.
Also, too, what about writing for a specific time period? I mean, you would take, let's say, two men in the 40s in a newsroom who are going to speak in probably much more of an eloquent fashion versus sort of the bro culture of today, which is more dude, Yeah,
it's very, very different, very different. Look, people in the 70s and 80s talk differently in the 90s and the 00s, or the 40s and 50s. It's all very different. But the basic way of communicating, having clear, interesting words that lead you to a particular point. That's always what it is. It's how you get there. It's been a little bit different. And writing anything I've written that's had interestingly, I wrote a Christmas movie for Hallmark a few years ago, and there were flashbacks to the 1920s. And I had to write dialogue that seemed about right for the 1920s, and it was just cadence, it was just being a little bit more formal, a little bit more on the nose maybe with some of the things that were said, and it was fine, and it just, I think it worked, I mean, it wasn't about going back and seeing, now what word did they use in the 1920s for, automobile, or something. I mean, it wasn't that, it was a feeling, it was a texture to the words. So that can be really fun, because we don't exactly know how people talked. I mean, yes, we have movies from back then and we can see, but we're still filtering those things through a contemporary perspective. So it's not going to be quite like it was back then. And you want people to be able to relate to it and understand it.
Is there a specific structure you use in your screenplays?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, defer to the classic storytelling structure, which is the three act structure, the different, like sort of a series of movements across the whole script. I break it down into 3 acts, 4 quarters, 12 sequences. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, anytime I try to mix it up a little bit, let's put this way, I'm a big believer in drawing inside the lines and then messing it up, but at least knowing that you've got your framework the way that most stories are told best, and most effectively, and then you can kind of mess it up and smudge it up and kind of put your stamp on it, and all of that. I'm not such a big believer that what's supposed to happen on page 60 happens exactly on page 60. Well, if it's page 58 or 63, or if it based upon the length of your script, 42, as long as the movements or the proportion of your story is right, the movements kind of are kind of the kind of traditional story, not traditional, classic storytelling, because traditional always sounds like it's, you're just in a box. That to me is important. But I'm a big believer in structure. I believe you get really found out about why your story isn't working when you kind of don't follow some kind of structure, some kind of classic movie storytelling structure.
So going back to when you were at the writer's boot camp, how would you know a story was great, but it just needed to have more structure infused in it?
Well, sometimes I believe you can structure any story. You have to have enough of a story. You have to have enough of a way to expand that story into a full movie. Sometimes you watch a movie and you go, nothing happened in that movie, or it was, what a bunch of nothing, whatever. It was really because there may not have been enough story. Sometimes, my very first screenplay, I had 3 different ideas for scripts, and I ended up putting all 3 together, and I found my story. Individually, each story may not have been enough. Somehow or other, all 3 of those ideas together just sort of fit like this puzzle, and I was able to, to create this script. So there's that, there's that approach to it. But basically, you know a good story when you hear it, or you know the beginnings of a good story, a story that has potential or an interesting character, or a kind of a lot of stories are just setup. It's like, well, blah 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 blah. Well, that's great, but like, what happens then? Because that's only taking me through the first act, and the second act is always the most difficult act if you don't know where you're going. And most anybody can write the first act of a script, but it's where it goes from there that's tricky. So sometimes an idea may be just all setup, and there's not much beyond that. But if you take another idea and pair it, and another idea and bring it in, and kind of layer it, then you may have more of that story. It's about finding the story. You can, like I said, you can structure anything. You can create a structure as long as there's enough story, and finding that story, which is the challenge.
We've heard screenwriters use this phrase, cracking the story. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, cracking the story is kind of, to continue from what we were just talking about, it's you have a story, you have the beginnings of a story, but then you beat out the story, you create the whole story, you roll out the carpet, basically, the whole story. So you don't really crack the story, and it may be more of a TV term than a film term, I'm not sure, but you don't crack the story until you are able to, you can tell the story from start to finish, and any of the holes in it are filled. And I mean, that's my interpretation of it. I mean, that you just, the concept of cracking something is like, oh, that was what was missing. We got it. Now we crack the story, and the rest of it just falls into place. So there's that, but also I think the concept of just being able to tell the story from start to finish. If I have to, if I send in a pitch, let's say, if I write up a pitch to send in to a producer or network or something for a movie or a TV pilot or something, I don't just I may send a premise line and see if just the general premise line is of interest, and they may say, oh no, we're doing something like that. Oh, that's great, give me more. I will give them the story from start to finish. It doesn't have to be very long. It could be a page and a half that I'm writing, but at least I'm not just giving them preamble. I'm not just giving them the first act of something. I'm not just giving them, like a tease. I'm basically telling them cracking that story for them. I'm telling them where that story is going to go from start to finish. Not necessarily in great detail, sometimes in more detail, but it's really about being able to show that this is an entire story. This is where this will move, and then we can fill it in and amplify it as we go along. So it's really being able to tell a story from start to finish. For me, anyway, that's my interpretation of it.
So what about those writers who say sometimes they begin something without knowing the ending?
Yeah, well, I've done that.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, I've
Okay.
done that. Or the ending has changed a lot. With April, May, and June with this play, I didn't know what they were going to find. I didn't know that at the end of the first act the sisters were going to find something. That just, it became the obvious. It became the thing that was driving me, and I didn't even realize it. And I didn't know what that thing was going to be until I thought about it. So yeah, that was a case where I really didn't know. I've definitely written things where, if you're writing a romantic comedy, generally the couple will get back together in the end. There's all of that. There's some, kind of some givens. But yeah, sometimes you don't know. Frankly, I do think it's better to know, or at least have some idea. It's like getting in your car and saying, well, I know how to get halfway there, but I don't really know where I'm going after that. You're going to be stuck in the middle of nowhere. So it's not dissimilar with a story. I prefer to know where I was going, and I think, certainly, before you start sitting down and writing it, you should have a pretty good idea of where you're going. And if it does evolve, or if it changes along the way, great. Work with it, see where it takes you. These stories unfold on their own sometimes. I think it's helpful to. Like I said, I'm a big believer in structure, but I have and having the beats out before I start writing something, from start to finish. But we can be surprised, and there's definitely been times that I have not known exactly where I was going until I got there.
Have you ever given up on a script because you just lost interest?
Here and there. I generally don't start writing something unless I've done enough outlining and enough exploration of the idea to know it's worth going to script. Particularly if I'm writing something on spec. There are definitely things I've written on spec that a few things I've started, and for some reason I've just sort of abandoned because I felt like if I can go back and finish this sometime if I want to, but it's not great enough. It's not going to be unique enough. So it becomes a bit of an exercise. But by and large, I've always tried not to start writing something unless I felt it was something I was going to be able to finish, or that it was really worth doing. It's like reading a book. It's like if I'm reading a book, if I go to the trouble of starting to read it, I might as well finish it. But unless an idea is terrible, we don't always have great ideas. Sometimes there's just not enough there. But I usually can know that in the outline stage, to save me the hardship of writing the script and having to sort of kill it basically.
So what if you meet with a writer that's new to the industry, or baby writer, whatever you want to call them, and they just have a slew of unfinished scripts?
Well, there's a reason you have a slew of unfinished scripts. You need, especially if you're starting off writing, you need one or two good, solid, finished scripts. So when I hear somebody has a slew of unfinished scripts, it means that they're really not picking and choosing their stories well. That they're not passionate enough about the story, or they're cheating themselves about what the story is about, or they're trying to just write a thriller because they think that's going to sell or something like that. And a lot of people start writing without having the tools, the necessary tools. Everybody thinks, oh, I can write, but they don't really understand structure. They don't really understand, and I'm not saying you have to take a course in it or whatever, but you have to have done your homework, in one way or another, and understand how to tell a story cinematically or for television. And not everybody has done that. Some people just jump in and they're not really ready.
Can you take us through your outlining process?
Sure. Generally, what I'll do is I'll start with a premise line. I'll write out a premise line, sort of, basically for me, like the foundation of the script, a couple of sentences, take from start to finish, and then I'll expand that into, I don't know, maybe 2, 3, 4 pages. Just sort of write it in sections. So I'll divide it into basically, if it's a movie, 3 movie acts, but more in quarters. So it's like the equivalent of quarter, 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 which takes me through the 4 quarters or the 3 acts of the movie. So I can keep it, because one of the things that happens when you start writing it, for me anyway, when I start writing out writing an outline in prose form, is that if you don't, for me, if I don't kind of stop writing at a certain point, you end up with, let's say your outline is 4 pages, you're writing it just outline in 4 pages. The first 2 pages may really only be the first quarter of your script, because you end up writing so much, and then you have to really, then ultimately you end up with kind of disproportionate acts. So basically, I'm just trying to write it as tightly as I can. I'll write it long, and then I'll edit it. But in the end, I want to end up with kind of 4 relatively close descriptions of each quarter. Okay, so let's say that ends up being 3-4 pages, whatever. Then if it's an assignment, then I'll give it to the executive or whatever. I'll get notes on it, rework it, and then if it's not for me, I'll do the same thing for myself. And then what I do is I divide and this was really, I have to credit Writers Bootcamp for this, because this was kind of the way they taught me how to do it, and how I always do it now, and I taught other people, and I think it's pretty, it's one of those things that just sort of like, I don't think it's an uncommon way to do it, but it kind of boils it down to, I think, a really effective way of doing it is that I divide it up into 12 sequences. 3 sequences in the first act, 6 in the second act, and 3 in the third act of equal weight. So basically, if you're writing a 120-page script, or it's 10 pages a sequence. If you're more like a 100-page script, it's 8 or 9 pages a sequence. And I beat out the list of scenes. So I'll take, I create a sequence sentence. So this is sequence 1, 2, and 3. So out of that sequence sentence that I write out, pulled from the outline, the longer outline, I then write a list of the scenes that will comprise that sequence. So I'll put like the scenes in a row, and then I'll figure out how many pages that scene will approximately be, so that I can add up each sequence and say at the end those 6 scenes will equal 8.5 pages or something. And it's an estimate. Sometimes I'm very off, but it's an estimate. And this is just my kind of organized way of doing it, and how I don't get lost in the process, and how I really kind of stay on track. This is just mine. Everybody has their way of doing it. And so I do that. So ultimately, you end up with basically 12 series of scene lists. So, which should ultimately, when you add it all up, should equal whatever your desired page count is: 100, 105 pages, 120 pages, an estimate. And then I take that, I put that onto my final draft, that list onto my final draft, and I create a slug line over each one. Interior, living room night, exterior, baseball field day, whatever. And so I have the line, and then what the scene is about, and then I have the slug line. So basically what I end up with is a whole written script, except without dialogue, essentially. And then you go in and just, you craft it. And to me, it's a very step-by-step process. So it's like an accordion. You're constantly expanding that accordion until you have the whole script written. So that works for me. But everybody does it differently.
What about writers who say they don't do outlines?
If they can do it,
that's okay.
More power to them. I look at like some of the Coen brothers movies, some of the great movies of our time, right? Amazing stories, incredible character, incredibly creative. Those movies are not all necessary. I don't know if they outline, but they don't feel as specifically structured as most movies you see. Some are, some aren't. I think they take, they're really brilliant. I think they're just able to, they're able to infuse their stories in their own world, in their own structure. For example, if you can do it, it's great. I've just seen too many writers who get lost in the process because they haven't sort of laid it out enough ahead of time. But again, it works for me. I never look at any of this like, oh, it's putting me in a box, or I'm using a formula. It's not at all. It's how I write, and especially when you're on a deadline and you have a limited amount of time to write something, it really helps me move more quickly and give me a system of sort of checks and balances on my material, and kind of and it helps me not overwrite as well. And ultimately, maybe spend, not lose too much time on any material that I'm not ultimately going to put in the script.
So what's your nemesis when you're on a deadline?
You know, changes, too many changes along the way, you know, kind of any wholesale changes that may sort of crop up. You know, it's never a problem, you know, kind of just shifting something, rearranging something, changing dialogue, you know, threading something in. But sometimes there's that wholesale change, like you think something's working and that just whole concept is just not, it's just not playing. And you know it's not gonna, in the end you're gonna be found out and it's not gonna work. So it's like lifting out a whole part and putting it aside and reconfiguring. And when you have to do that in the middle, it doesn't happen often. And again, I think if you've got a strong outline, and particularly if it's an assignment where you're working with people and they're approving an outline and they're in agreement with what you've written, you kind of try to stick to pretty much what you sold essentially. But yeah, too many changes when there's a tight deadline can be really difficult. Unexpected changes.
Can you tell us about an actual assignment you've received and go through the timeline and how you worked your way through the deadline? Maybe you came in over it, maybe under it?
Yeah, well, you know, with assignments, it's often, you know, there's a particular deadline or a goal, you know, that you're trying to reach, but then the goalposts keep changing just because schedules change and you know, you end up with more time, sometimes you end up with a little less time. You know, I've worked on films that they realized they needed to shoot a little sooner than they thought, so you have to step it up. But generally, there's enough time to do your draft, to do several other drafts. You can, I've on a lot of my TV movies, I've worked throughout the production even, you know, where if something's been a problem, I've changed something, the director will call and I'll change something or alter something or add a scene or that kind of thing. So sometimes it goes even, you know, beyond the just turning in the script stage. But you know, generally the way it goes is that, you know, you get the outline approved. I structure the script, I outline the script, you know, do that step process that I do, and then I start writing. And I do generally schedule myself to, you know, I'll take out like a calendar and say, you know, okay, I've got 6 weeks to write this first draft, so I'm going to, by this week I want to get here, I want to finish it here, I want to have 2 weeks to rewrite, that kind of thing. And that helps me. I just find writing anything down and seeing anything visually really helps me, you know, make it happen. And I just try to barrel forward, you know, and also if I see, honestly, if I see a glitch or I see something that's not working, to make sure to check in with my executive or my producer and say, look, what do you think about this? You know, I don't worry about like not having the answer or something like that. I want to make sure that, you know, that we're all in agreement on something. And I'm a big believer in collaboration. I like collaborating, especially when there are good ideas. And, you know, and sometimes you just talk out a problem and just talking it out, it kind of opens up what the problem is, or the person you're talking to has an idea. Well, why don't you try this? That might work better. And, you know, and that's a big help. And that can take a little time. You know, that can take a little time. You have to backtrack and then, you know, catch up again. But by and large, you know, what happens is where you end up losing time is in the rewriting. You know, where not losing time as much as like where the schedule can kind of go off kilter, you know, because you may get something in on time or even a little bit early. There are times I'll get something in a little earlier than expected. Other times, generally, I think I hit the deadline. Sometimes I may be a little bit late, but then it takes time for everybody to read the script and to get input from maybe the director if the director's on board, and then before you know it, you're writing another draft and another draft. I mean, sometimes it could be several drafts, sometimes it's many drafts. It just depends upon, you know, how many voices there are and you know, certain production issues that they know are going to happen. They're ready to shoot the script, and then they're location scouting, and they realize they don't have a church, but they have a, you know, a bowling alley, whatever, you know, and so you have to rearrange the scene for the location that's available. Weather can be an issue. Sometimes you have to change. So there are lots of changes along the way when things are going to go into production. That's the, you know, that's the good news. That's the high-class problem, because you're making changes because the movie's actually being made. You know, I like to work in waves. You know, I like to work in movements. You know, where I can. I like what's the word? Stages of closure. So I like to be able to finish a draft and then start over and rewrite that draft, and so that it goes in more quicker stages than one massively long stage, where you're just just agonizing over something for months and months and months. I'd rather write it faster, hopefully it's good, and then go back and do a clean sweep through it and fix everything, and just keep, again, go back to the clay, keep molding the clay. To me, it's very motivating to have new drafts all the time. And to see that, you see everything sort of like, it's almost in graphic relief. It sort of comes out a little bit more at you, and you see what's happening. But again, everybody's process is different. I over the course of time, I've become very much not an agonizing writer. I just, just push forward, head down, push forward, and just really try to do the best I can, like everybody does, but I just worry less. I just try to do a great job, hopefully, and just I know I can fix things. I always feel like I have enough tools, and I've written so many things that I do understand how to fix things and how to come up with ideas if somebody doesn't like the product, how I can fix it, how we can make it better, why it worked, what was my intention, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Do you get nervous when there's nothing in the works, or is there a sense of freedom because of the possibilities of what could happen?
Yeah.
Do you almost thrive off that?
Yeah, I don't know if I thrive. I mean, I honestly, because careers can be such roller coasters, and you can go through, as a writer, you can go through many periods where you're really not really not working for hire, and hopefully you're writing on your own, and you're cranking out material, and you're utilizing the free time. But because sometimes there can be a lot of downtime, it can be nerve-wracking. I like to, honestly, the ideal thing is to have enough work along the way to keep you financially solvent, but have a little bit of downtime in between to work on your own projects. Like, if based upon what you like to do. I mean, I like writing stage plays, so I like to have time here and there. I recently had shoulder surgery, and I was home. Like literally, I mostly didn't leave the house for 6 weeks, and I could only type with one hand, but I was able to sort of use my other hand, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to finish something at the end of the 6 weeks. This is tough being here. I'm in pain. I'm going to finish writing something, and I had started a new play before I had the surgery, and I just literally just finished this new play, at the end of this period, and it was just so great. And I'm very happy with that particular play. I'm looking forward to continuing to work on it. But I didn't have an assignment at that time, so it did give me the freedom to write that. And during that period, not feeling all that great, it was really nice not to have somebody waiting for something from me, because I didn't want to disappoint them or something, and because of the pain and whatever. So that was a good period, to not be, to be on assignment. But by and large, I like it to be err on the side of more work, more paid work, or more assignment work than not. It's like charging, your batteries is charged. I like just knowing there's stuff out there that's happening. But I'm also pretty, I'm just always working on something and writing something, and or trying to market old scripts or work with my agent to get new meetings or make things happen. So I really utilize the time to do that. What's nice about having a little free time is that you can get back to your career and your bigger picture of your career, and not, because when you nose the grindstone, sometimes you forget, well, but I did have that script I was trying to sell, or I still do want to get that assignment there, or I want to be on that show there, or whatever, and you just can't do it because you're so focused on your work, and the issue at hand. So yeah, it's nice to have a combination of both, but you're probably better off having the work, more work than not, I think.
Well, it goes back to what you said about kind of like focusing too much on the minutia. So it sounds like, even though you do like to be working and you like to have stuff going, it sounds like, but that to have a little bit of a breathing room, you can kind of stand back and see more. Yeah,
you sometimes lose the big picture, when you're in the cave, and then when you get out of it, then you can look back and say, okay, I'm out now, got a little time, where am I? Let me because as a writer, and it's similar for directors and producers, you have to be the master of your own ship, the master of your own destiny in terms of your career. You have to keep it moving forward if you want to keep working. And an agent is great, but they can just do so much, in terms of it. It's really up to us to really stay on top of it and stay focused in terms of what our end game is, or what our goals are, or what are my goals? My goals are to keep writing movies that get made, and write things that are meaningful to me and that I hope people will enjoy, and all of that, to tell my stories and that kind of thing. But that doesn't just happen, and sometimes you have to really keep your eye on the ball in terms of, because time goes very, very fast, and if it's not you, it'll be somebody else, and we have a finite amount of time on this planet.
Absolutely. And going back to when you left one career, and you don't have to give too many details about it, but were you able to step back from a lot of minutia at that point, because you probably had more free time on your hands?
It was a really weird time, because I was so used to getting a steady paycheck, and I had, fortunately, I had stashed away enough money to have to go through this process and until I got work again. But that was a big thing for me, to kind of just be okay about getting sporadic paychecks, and not knowing when the next paycheck was going to be, than knowing it's just a safety net, basically. And that part was difficult. But at that part, when I left that job and started becoming a screenwriter, TV writer at that point, it was all focus all the time for me. I mean, it was just like I just dove into the deep end, and and there was so much to do and so much to write, and you had to it was starting a whole new career. There was just a lot to learn, and a lot. I had to be out there a lot, and really just keep my eye on the ball. So it was an exciting time, but definitely challenging. But yeah, it was not a lot of downtime. And also back then, I would feel very guilty about having downtime. I would just feel like I shouldn't be going to the movies. I should be working on my new spec script or something. And that was hard. I mean, it took a long time for me to not feel guilty about not working. But that eventually happened when I got enough work and okay, I don't want to be working, at that moment, So that was okay. But you go through phases. Every career has its phases, and we grow as people, and and as we experience more, and as you become more confident, or more self-possessed, or more, just less beholden to the forces out there,
Right. Well, I think too, did it take training for you to get out of that 9 to 5 or whatever it was, 9 to 7 mindset?
Well, it kept it kept me pretty structured. I mean, I was so used to that kind of 9 to 5 or 9. That job was like 9 to 9. But I would I was used to getting up early, used to just getting my work done, used to having a goal for every day and all that. So that translated really well when I was working on my own, because otherwise it might have been like, oh my God, how am I going to organize this? What am I going to do? That part wasn't an issue. It was just like, will I get a job? Will I be will I be successful? Will I be able to, really make a go of this?
Can we talk about where your characters come from and what's your process for developing them?
Well, they say that you want to put a character, when you're moving, for the beginning of a movie or something, you want to put your character where they would least like to be. It's at a moment of crossroads where their life is going to change, and you're going to take that journey with them, and you put them out of you get them out of their comfort zone, basically. And the reason they're in a comfort zone is because they're kind of doing something wrong. Their personality, there's something in that personality that's Writers Boot Camp calls it a misbehavior. It's a great word. It's an adjective to describe what they're doing wrong, how they're negatively affecting other people, but we still care about them anyway, and it shows how they can change. So you find somebody, you create a character who is doing something wrong or ineffectively, and somebody's going to have to come into their life who's going to kind of turn them around and compliment them and get the best out of that personality, and then have them make that personality work for them. So you just try to find a character at a crossroads who's going to do something interesting, especially when you're writing things that are not plot driven necessarily, like The Bourne Identity or something. You're writing character. If you're writing character driven things, whether it's a comedy or drama or whatever, but there's it's driven by character, which always make for the best stories. And so then you figure out who needs to come into that character's life to help them on this journey, help them accomplish this mission. Movies are basically about a relationship, about two people on a journey, with people around them and supporting characters and an opponent and all that. But it's basically, I boil it down to the main character and who comes into their life to go on that journey with them, and what is that relationship like. So in creating the main character, whether it's a man or a woman, they always say that we are our main characters, whoever we're writing. we could be writing a serial killer, but they are us. We're infusing them with our point of view, not our values, not our history, but what our point of view is, or how we see what their point of view should be. If that makes sense. So part of it is knowing what the journey, setting the character, creating an interesting character in an interesting environment, but knowing that they need to be on a journey to solve the issue of their life and the movie. And I start there.
Is it different for stage plays versus screenplays?
A little bit different, it can be very similar, but still, even a stage play, you want that stage play to begin at a moment of a very important moment for that character's life, the moment that changes it all, or that the time that's going to shift them as people and their lives. So they walk away, they emerge from that story, kind of a different person. April, May, and June is these three sisters come together, and they're all pretty much set in their ways and they're okay the way they are, but by the end of this afternoon they really have a better understanding of who they are, why they've done what they've done in their lives, and why they've reacted to both of their dead parents, late parents, in such different ways. And it's all because of this kind of like combustion that happens with the three people, these three women, over the course of a couple of hours in an afternoon. So you want them to come through their journey, as a changed person in some way. Some characters don't need changing, so that may not be as an interesting a character, but we all need to do something better. We all need to do something more effectively, even if it's to learn how to have a relationship with somebody. What's a romantic comedy except two, basically unexpected or mismatched people who sparks fly, and then they realize that they can complement each other, make each other better people, and be with somebody that they never expected, until maybe they can't, and then of course at the end they do, but it's finding people at an interesting point in their life, who have something to learn.
So let's take a writer that's maybe has too dull or flat of a character versus one it's too much stuff. They're putting too much.
Right.
How do you know?
Well, you want to keep your character on a track, and you want to have a goal in mind, whether the goal is to have that romantic relationship, to rob that bank, to come to terms with their addiction, whatever it is, you want them to have an end goal and keep them on a track. And as soon as you start getting away from all of that, short of like the kind of interesting human moments that may happen along the way of a journey, then you realize you're kind of diffusing your story, and then we're losing the focus of the character. So I think you usually pretty much know when you're going off the track. When your character is just not acting the way you'd like them to.
Well, I know you've seen so many films,
Yeah.
and you're also a film reviewer.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of your favorite films where that character starts out in a very uncomfortable place? To name a few.
Well, comedies are always great. One of my favorite movie comedies is 16 Candles, the John Hughes movie with Molly Ringwald. And the great thing about that movie, it's just it's relatable. You got the annoying grandparents, you got the clueless parents, you got the annoying sister, you got all the dweeby kids in school. It's like everybody can relate to all of that. And Samantha, Molly Ringwald's character, she's just she's in the worst moment of her life. Nobody knows it's her birthday. She's 16. Everybody forgets. The dorky guy likes her. The hot guy doesn't pay attention to her. It's just this little microcosm, and she's like so uncomfortable and so self-conscious, and by the end of that she just gets a little bit of confidence, and like the cute guy likes her, and I love that movie. It's just funny, but it's so sweet and so smart. That's one of my favorites. I mean, and even Tootsie, he's such a self-possessed guy, but he's in such a bad place because he has no money and he can't get a job, and he doesn't want to play a tomato the way they want him to on commercials and all of that, and he just really goes to the wall to try to do something to be successful, and it completely upends his life. So he's out of his comfort zone, but he makes the best of it. That movie is all about being out of your comfort zone, but yet making it work for you, which I like. But on a dramatic front, when you deal with thrillers or something, those characters are put in, Silence of the Lambs, great film, great book. She's somebody who's thrust in. She's somebody who's almost not ready to be thrust into this horrifying world she is, and she's got like she's got somebody in an Anthony Hopkins character that. who's such a, tests her so much, and, is so smart, and such a spider in the fly kind of thing, and she's so out of her league, that's an interesting character who we begin with in a very uncomfortable place, who is made even more uncomfortable, uses that discomfort, uses her past, the difficulty of her past to really emerge through and really succeed. So that's kind of fascinating.
How important is it for you to have a strong personal connection to the material that you're writing?
Oh, I think it's really important. I think it's so important. If you're writing something for you, like a play, a stage play, or something that's personal, obviously, absolutely. But even on something that's not particularly about you or something of your life and your concern, you have to find your way into it, and you have to find your way, how do you connect to it? You are writing, what makes you the unique writer of any story or any script is your perspective and what you bring to it. If you and I were to write the same script, we might get to the same end goal, and the story might not be dissimilar, but how we get there would be very different, because we'd be bringing our own experiences to it, and our own views of things, and other people's views of things that we've seen. So yeah, I think that being able to connect, to find stories that you connect with, or create connections that you relate to, because it becomes very honest that way. And so whether it's comedy or drama, honesty and real experiences, and like we talked about earlier, the things that you overhear people saying in the supermarket that you can use because that moved you or made you laugh, and you can use that. That's those connections are really, really critical, I think, for good writing and good stories. You don't have to, but I definitely think it's a big help.
Why did you begin writing?
That's a good question. I think I started writing, like when I started writing, my very first writing that I did was I wrote movie reviews for the high school newspaper. And I think part of it was there was a certain escape factor to it. Back then, I mean, certainly movies were a bit of an escape, and writing about them was like, I had a lot of thoughts about them. I love movies, and I read a lot of film criticism as a kid, and it was really, a big part of my world, and it meant a lot to me. And it was like, well, I want to do that. I can write that, and I've read so much, and I've seen so many movies. It's fun. Let me take a crack at it, and it was fun. And I like being able to share opinions and get conversations going about things, and hear people who had different opinions than mine, and all of that. And it was just, I just love writing the words and crafting the words, and it just sort of evolved, and I've always loved movies and theater and television and stories and books and telling stories and reading stories and all of that. So at a certain point, if you want to be part of that, you either are on one side of it or another. So I started off as a publicist, promoting other people's movies and being able to talk about other people's movies, writing and selling other people's movies. But then at a certain point I realized I wanted to start telling those stories. I wanted to be the one to create those movies and those stories. That's sort of started speaking to me much more than being on the other side of the table, as I call it. So yeah, it just sort of evolved, and also it ultimately it's something that I think I have, more of a talent at than other things. So, you go where you have the most talent, most ability.
Do you remember the defining moment when you said, I think I want to move on from the publicity?
Yes.
Oh, you do? Was there a defining?
Exactly. Exactly. I was there. Like it was yesterday. My boss was leaving to go on a trip for 3 weeks, and she said to me, they want you to sign a contract here. And because I was at a place where I think they were going to promote me to, like, give me a little bit of a promotion or whatever, some title promotion, and give me some new duties or something. And she said, so they want you to sign a contract. I said, well, how long is the contract for? She said, well, it's a 6-year contract. It's 2 years, 2 years, and 2 years. And she said, so while I'm away, read it, take a look at it, and then sign it. And when I come back, I'll sign it, and we'll move forward. And when she was gone, I was like, I can't sign that contract. And I just realized I didn't want to be there. It just wasn't right for me. It was a tie and jacket job at the time, and you always, it was like very political and all of that. And not that screenwriting doesn't have its own politics and all of that, but I don't know. I just felt there was just something. I just wasn't accomplishing what I really felt I wanted to at a really young age. I just still wasn't like. I just felt like this wasn't where I needed to be. Even though I was doing well with it, it wasn't where I needed to be. And my father was visiting me around that time. My father, he passed away last year, but he was a very bottom line, kind of money oriented kind of guy, very meat and potatoes, and not a showbiz guy at all. But I always supported what I did, but just didn't have a great sense of it. And he said to me, I said, you know, Dad, they want me to sign a contract. What do you think I should do? He goes, well, do you want to stay there? And I said, I don't. And then he said, well, then you should leave. I said, well, I can't leave this job. This is a job that people aspire to. You know, what if, you know, he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I actually want to write. I want to write, you know, movies and television. He goes, then that's what you should do. I said, well, you know, but what if it doesn't work out? He says, listen, you don't want to be my age and look back and say, I should have done it, and then it's too late. He says, if that's what you have to do, you have to do it. And I was like shocked that he said that. And not that I always listened to him necessarily, but it was like, it was coming from an interesting place. And I just thought about it and I said, he's right. I'm not gonna sign that contract. And my boss came back and she said, so did you sign the contract? And I said, no. And she said, oh, so you just didn't get to it yet? I said, no, I'm not signing that contract. And she said, you're not signing the contract? And I said, no. I said, I'm leaving. I'm gonna write for television. And I did. And then I called my father and I said, Dad, I quit my job. And he said, you did what? How could you quit a job like that? Who quits a job like that? And, you know, for years after that, you know, he would say to me, you know, if you stayed there, you probably would have been president of that place. But I was just so glad to be gone. And it was a, you know, good experience for certain things. Certainly helped me in many, many ways as a writer and as a marketer of my material. But that was the time I knew I had to move on. And I never looked back. Yeah.
So when you got your things together in a box or whatever and left with, did you feel a weight had been lifted?
I felt so great. You know, when I was saying goodbye to people, it was really fun. I don't mean to be arrogant about it or anything, because it was a difficult time, you know, work-wise and personally at that time, and I kind of needed to go. And I remember somebody who I worked with, he said to me, you know, what you're doing is so brave to leave. And I said, no, it would be more courageous to stay, you know, meaning that, like, it was tougher to stay than to go in a certain respect, but yet I knew I was I didn't realize what a deep pool I was diving into, you know, becoming a writer. Like I said, I just was so optimistic about it. I just felt I wasn't quite aware of the difficulties of it, you know. And so to me, it was just like the thing to do. Staying there would have been more difficult. But no, I was happy to go by the time I was done. Ready.
Do you think a lot of people do that in Hollywood? They stay in certain things, but
everybody in life often stays in things that they're just not happy with, because sometimes they don't know where to go. You know, I've been very fortunate. You know, I've kind of known what I've wanted to do. I've had things that I'm passionate about. You know, my work is my enjoyment. You know, so I feel very, very fortunate with that. But a lot of people aren't happy in a job, but they don't really know what else they want to do. And I would never recommend anybody just not be happy in something and just up and leave without knowing where they're going, because it could take a very long time to get another job, and you're always more valuable while you're employed, you know, whatever you're doing. Yeah, but I think there are definitely people who are, you know, living those, you know, just desperate in those desperate situations. But you know, I encourage people, you know, who really aren't happy in what they do, to find your passion and to figure out a way to make it a career if you can. Not everything can be. You know, not everything is that monetizable or that realistic. But you know, work is a big part of our lives, and it really helps if you can enjoy it.